Kobe Bryant, from sexual assault case to beloved legend. Kobe's comeback from 2003-2004 might be the most impossible redemption story in sports history, and I'm still trying to figure out how this man pulled it off. The sexual assault case should have ended his career, destroyed his reputation, and sent him into permanent exile. Instead, somehow, some way, Kobe came back stronger, more beloved, and more successful than ever before. Let me paint the picture of how low Kobe was in 2003, because you need to understand this wasn't just a bad week. This was career suicide in slow motion. Sexual assault allegations in Colorado, details that made your stomach turn, a marriage on the verge of collapse, and sponsors running away like the building was on fire. This wasn't just a basketball scandal. This was a complete character assassination with legal consequences that could have sent him to prison for 4 years to life. The Lakers almost traded him to Detroit for basically nothing because they thought he was radioactive waste. Detroit, Kobe Bryant, future Hall of Famer, almost got shipped to the basketball equivalent of Siberia because his own team didn't want to deal with the controversy. When your own organization is ready to dump you for spare parts, that's lower than rock bottom. That's beneath the Earth's core. But here's where Kobe's psychotic competitiveness became his salvation. While most people would have crumbled under the pressure, this man decided to prove he was still the best basketball player on the planet by doing something that had never been done before. The Mamba mentality wasn't just a marketing phrase. It was a survival mechanism designed to channel all that negative energy into basketball performance that bordered on supernatural. The 2005-2006 season was Kobe's revenge tour against everyone who counted him out. 81 points against Toronto, the second highest scoring game in NBA history, averaging 35.4 points for the season and carrying the worst Lakers team since the 1990s to the playoffs through sheer force of will. This man was playing like his life depended on it because, in many ways, it actually did. Every game was a statement that he wasn't going anywhere. The legal case got dismissed when the accuser refused to testify, but the court of public opinion was still in session. Kobe had to rebuild his image one incredible performance at a time. He couldn't just be good. He had to be historically great to overcome the stink of the allegations. And somehow, incredibly, impossibly, he did exactly that through sustained excellence that lasted over a decade. The relationship with Shaquille O'Neal was completely destroyed. Phil Jackson left town and the Lakers were in shambles. Kobe had to rebuild the entire franchise while rebuilding his own reputation. It's like trying to renovate your house while it's actively burning down around you. Most people would have requested a trade and started fresh somewhere else. Not Kobe. This maniac decided to stay and fix everything himself. The championships in 2009 and 2010 weren't just basketball victories, they were vindication. Kobe proved he could win without Shaq, proved he could lead a team, and proved that his focus was on basketball, not drama. Those titles carried more weight than his previous three because he earned them while carrying the baggage of his past and the doubts of his critics. What's absolutely insane is that by 2020, when Kobe died tragically, he was one of the most beloved athletes in the entire world. People who hated him in 2003 were mourning him in 2020. The transformation from accused rapist to global icon is something that shouldn't be possible in the internet age, but Kobe somehow made it happen through relentless excellence and calculated image rehabilitation. The Mamba Mentality book, the Oscar win for Dear Basketball, coaching his daughter's team. Kobe systematically rebuilt his image by showing different sides of his personality that nobody had ever seen before. He went from being perceived as a selfish player to a devoted father and community leader. The rebrand was masterful and seemingly genuine. Even now, people debate whether we should separate the athlete from the allegations, but what's undeniable is that Kobe's comeback defied every rule of cancel culture and public relations. He didn't just survive his scandal, he thrived despite it. That takes a special kind of mental strength that most people simply don't possess. The business partnerships gradually returned. Nike stayed loyal and eventually created an entire sub-brand around Kobe that's still profitable years after his death. McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and other major brands came back when the public showed they were ready to forgive. Money talks, but it only talks when people are actually listening. The international appeal was crucial to his comeback because fans overseas cared more about basketball excellence than American tabloid drama. Kobe became a global icon by focusing on the parts of his story that transcended cultural boundaries. Hard work, excellence, and championship pedigree that people could appreciate regardless of their background. Derrick Rose, from youngest MVP to injury-plagued journeyman to resurrection. Derrick Rose's fall and rise is the most heartbreaking and inspiring story in modern basketball, and I'm not ashamed to admit I get emotional watching this man's journey. From the youngest MVP in NBA history to a broken shell of himself to finding joy in basketball again, this story has more emotional ups and downs than a soap opera written by someone going through a midlife crisis. Let me take you back to 2011 when Derrick Rose was the chosen one, the hometown hero who was supposed to bring Chicago Chicago its first championship since Jordan. This man was 22 years old, dunking on everyone, and making the entire city believe that basketball magic was real. The MVP award wasn't just an individual achievement, it was a promise that Chicago basketball was back, and Rose was the messiah leading them to the promised land. Then April 28th, 2012 happened, and everything changed forever in the most brutal way possible. Game 1 of the playoffs against Philadelphia, Rose plants his foot to make a cut, and you hear that sound. The sound that every athlete fears, the sound that means your career might be over, the sound that still gives nightmares to anyone who witnessed it. Complete ACL tear. Not just any ACL tear, but one that happened to a player whose entire game was built on explosive athleticism and superhuman acceleration. But the real tragedy wasn't the injury, it was what came after. Rose missed the entire 2012-2013 season, and Chicago fans waited patiently because they believed their hero would return stronger than ever. Then he missed most of 2013-2014 with more injuries. Then 2014 to 2015 brought a meniscus tear. Each injury was like watching someone die slowly, and Bulls fans had to witness their dreams get crushed, one medical report at a time. The mental aspect was the worst part because you could see Rose losing confidence in his own body. This man went from being fearless to being terrified of every landing, every cut, every contact. He'd play tentatively, second-guessing every instinct that made him special. Watching someone forget how to be themselves is more painful than watching them fail at something new. Chicago fans eventually turned on him, and that had to hurt more than any physical injury. The same people who chanted his name during the MVP season were booing him for being cautious about his health. They wanted the old Rose back, but that Rose was dead, and they were angry at the new Rose for not being able to resurrect him. The pressure was absolutely unbearable. The "why can't I be MVP again" comment became a meme, but it was actually heartbreaking when you understood the context. This wasn't arrogance. This was a man desperately trying to convince himself that he could still be great. The question wasn't directed at reporters, it was directed at the universe, asking why his body betrayed him at the peak of his powers. New York, Cleveland, Minnesota. Rose became a journeyman, bouncing from team to team like a basketball nomad, searching for a place where he could rediscover his magic. Each stop was another attempt to prove he wasn't finished, another chance to show flashes of the player he used to be. The hope and disappointment cycle was exhausting for everyone involved. But then something beautiful happened in 2018 with Minnesota. Rose stopped trying to be 2011 MVP Rose and started being 2018 veteran Rose. He accepted his limitations, played within his role, and found joy in basketball again. The 50-point game against Utah wasn't just a statistical achievement. It was a man remembering why he fell in love with basketball in the first place. The tears after that 50-point game told the whole story. This wasn't just about scoring points. This was about proving to himself that he still had magic left in his body. The emotion was raw and real because it represented years of struggle, doubt, and perseverance finally paying off. Sometimes the best comebacks aren't about reaching the same heights. They're about finding peace with who you've become. Detroit gave him another chance to prove he could still contribute, and Rose embraced the veteran role perfectly. He became a mentor to young players while still providing valuable minutes off the bench. The transformation from franchise cornerstone to valuable role player showed incredible maturity and self-awareness that many superstars never develop. New York was supposed to be the feel-good ending to his story, playing for his hometown team and showing Madison Square Garden that he still had something left. While it didn't result in team success, Rose proved he could still be effective when healthy and properly utilized. The individual success validated all the work he put into reinventing his game. What makes Rose's comeback special is that it's not about returning to MVP form, it's about finding value and happiness in a different version of himself. He learned to be effective without being explosive, to contribute without being the center of attention, and to find joy in smaller victories. That's a life lesson that extends far beyond basketball. Allen Iverson, from practice rants to Hall of Fame redemption. Allen Iverson's rock bottom wasn't just about basketball. It was about watching a cultural icon become a walking punchline because he couldn't figure out how to be a professional athlete. The practice rant made him a meme before memes existed, but the real story is how AI went from being labeled a selfish cancer to being recognized as one of the most influential players in NBA history. That's a comeback that took decades to complete. Let me set the scene for how low AI fell in Philadelphia. The 2002 playoffs press conference where he said practice 22 times became the the defining moment of his career for all the wrong reasons. This man just came off averaging 33 points in the playoffs, nearly beat the Lakers in the finals, and somehow the story became about him not taking practice seriously. The media turned his greatest season into a joke about work ethic, but the practice rant was just the symptom. The real disease was AI's relationship with authority, coaching, and the concept of team basketball. He played like every possession was a highlight reel audition, took impossible shots at impossible times, and genuinely believed he could win championships by himself. The talent was undeniable, but the approach was unsustainable and ultimately unsuccessful. The gambling stories, the entourage problems, the constant drama. AI was living like a rap star instead of a basketball player. Reports of him losing hundreds of thousands in Atlantic City, showing up to games hungover, and treating team meetings like suggestions painted a picture of someone who had too much money and not enough guidance. The lifestyle was catching up to the performance. Philadelphia fans loved him, but were exhausted by him, which is the worst kind of relationship breakdown. They appreciated his effort and talent, but were tired of the chaos, the losses, and the feeling that AI cared more about his individual stats than team success. When your own city is ready to trade you, that's rock bottom for any superstar. The Denver trade was supposed to be a fresh start, but AI brought all his bad habits with him. He clashed with George Karl, undermined Carmelo Anthony's development, and generally made a mess of what should have been a championship caliber situation. Instead of adapting to a new environment, he tried to make the new environment adapt to him. That never works. Detroit was the beginning of the end of AI as a superstar. He came off the bench for the first time in his career and hated every minute of it. Watching someone who defined himself by being the answer struggle with a reduced role was painful for everyone involved. The pride wouldn't let him accept that Father Time was undefeated. The Memphis and Turkish league stints were just sad. AI was chasing paychecks and relevance in places that couldn't provide either. Watching one of the greatest guards in NBA history play overseas for teams nobody had heard of was like watching a legendary musician perform in subway stations. The talent was still there, but the context was all wrong. But here's where the comeback story gets beautiful. Time changed how people viewed AI's career. The analytics revolution proved that his shot selection wasn't as bad as people thought. The cultural impact analysis showed that he changed fashion, music, and athlete expression more than almost any player in history. The context of his era revealed that he was doing things nobody else could do. The Hall of Fame induction in 2016 was the moment AI's reputation officially flipped from problematic superstar to influential pioneer. The speech was emotional, honest, and showed a level of self-reflection that people hadn't seen from him during his playing career. He acknowledged his mistakes while standing proud of his impact. That's growth in real time. Young players started studying AI's game and giving him credit for inspiring their approach to basketball. Kyrie Irving, Russell Westbrook, and other dynamic guards openly talked about learning from AI's fearlessness and creativity. The influence became undeniable when the players themselves started acknowledging it publicly. The documentary Iverson helped tell his story from his perspective and reminded people of the context surrounding his career. Growing up in poverty, dealing with racism, carrying the expectations of an entire city, AI's story became more sympathetic when people understood the pressures he was facing both on and off the court. Social media played a huge role in AI's rehabilitation because highlight videos of his best moments went viral and reminded people why he was special. The crossover on Jordan, the step over on Tyronn Lue, the playoff performances, the good memories overshadowed the bad press conferences when people could see them side by side. The fashion influence became impossible to ignore as the NBA relaxed its dress code and players started expressing themselves through clothing. AI was ahead of his time in understanding that athletes could be cultural figures, not just sports figures. He paid the price for being early to that realization, but he got credit when the league caught up. Dwight Howard, from locker room cancer to championship contributor. Dwight Howard's comeback story proves that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. And boy, did this man lose everything. From being the face of the Orlando Magic and one of the most dominant players in the league to being considered virtually unplayable and toxic, Dwight's fall was spectacular. But the 2020 Lakers championship run showed that redemption is possible when you finally accept who you are instead of who you think you should be. Let me take you back to 2012 when Dwight Howard was still Superman and thought he could demand his way to success. The Orlando exit was messy, unprofessional, and set the tone for everything that followed. This man forced his way out of a situation where he was beloved, respected, and the cornerstone of the franchise. The way he handled that departure should have been a warning sign for every team that considered trading for him. The Lakers experiment was a disaster of epic proportions. You had Kobe Bryant, one of the most obsessive competitors in sports history, trying to play with Dwight Howard, who thought practice was optional and effort was negotiable. The culture clash was immediate, obvious, and ultimately destructive. Watching those two try to coexist was like watching oil try to mix with water. Kobe's frustration with Dwight Dwight became legendary because you could literally see him losing faith in real time. Steve Nash, one of the most patient and professional players ever, looked like he wanted to strangle Dwight by February. When you can make Steve Nash consider violence, you've achieved something special in the worst possible way. The Houston years proved that Dwight's problems weren't specific to Los Angeles. They were specific to Dwight Howard. James Harden and the Rockets tried to build around him, and within 2 years, they were ready to move on. When a team that desperately needs a center decides your center isn't worth keeping, that's a special kind of problematic. Atlanta, Charlotte, Washington. Each stop was another attempt to prove he still had value, and each stop ended with disappointed fans and frustrated teammates. Dwight became the basketball equivalent of a rental car that looks good but breaks down as soon as you need it to work. The pattern was undeniable and depressing. The Memphis stint was rock bottom because even a team with no expectations couldn't find a way to make Dwight Howard work. Getting released by the Grizzlies isn't just embarrassing, it's a sign that your value as a basketball player has hit negative numbers. When teams would rather play short-handed than deal with your attitude, that's career death. But something changed during Dwight's time away from the NBA. Maybe it was the humbling experience of being unwanted, maybe it was getting older and wiser, or maybe it was the realization that basketball was about to end for him forever. Whatever happened, the Dwight Howard who returned to the Lakers in 2019 was fundamentally different from the one who left in 2013. The role acceptance was the key to everything. Instead of demanding post touches and arguing with coaches, Dwight embraced being a role player, energy guy, and locker room leader. He went from wanting to be the focal point to being grateful for an opportunity. That shift in mindset transformed him from a liability into an asset overnight. The relationship with LeBron James showed how much Dwight had grown because LeBron has no patience for nonsense, and somehow they made it work beautifully. LeBron probably would have demanded Dwight's release if he brought any of his old attitude problems. Instead, they developed a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. The 2020 playoffs were Dwight's redemption tour because he played with joy, energy, and team-first mentality that people hadn't seen from him in a decade. Watching him celebrate his teammates' success and embrace his limited role was genuinely heartwarming. He remembered why he fell in love with basketball in the first place. The championship celebration hit different because you could see how much it meant to someone who thought he'd never win one. Dwight's emotional response to finally getting a ring showed that all the years of struggle and disappointment had actually made the achievement more meaningful. Sometimes the journey makes the destination sweeter. The media relationships improved dramatically because Dwight stopped being defensive and started being accountable. His interviews became refreshingly honest about his past mistakes and current mindset. Admitting you were wrong takes courage, and Dwight showed more courage in those press conferences than he had in years of basketball games. Ben Simmons, the current comeback in progress. Ben Simmons represents the comeback story that's happening right now, and it might be the most fascinating redemption arc we've ever witnessed because we're watching it unfold in real time. From being a #1 overall pick with unlimited potential to becoming the most criticized player in the league to potentially finding his way back, this story is still being written. The Philadelphia situation was toxic beyond repair. The inability to shoot, the fear of free throws, the playoff collapses. Simmons became a symbol of wasted potential and mental fragility. The relationship with fans, teammates, and the organization deteriorated to the point where playing basketball became impossible. When your own city boos you for passing up dunks, that's psychological damage that's hard to overcome. The Brooklyn trade was supposed to be a fresh start, but mental health issues and back problems kept him sidelined for most of his time there. The criticism followed him across state lines, and the pressure to prove himself became overwhelming. Sometimes a change of scenery isn't enough when the problems are internal rather than external. But here's what's fascinating about Simmons' potential comeback. He's still young, still talented, and still has time to rewrite his narrative. The mental health awareness around his situation has created more understanding and patience than previous generations of struggling players received. Society's evolution in understanding psychological challenges has created space for his redemption. The physical skills that made him special haven't disappeared. The vision, the passing ability, the defensive versatility, those talents are still there waiting to be unleashed when his confidence returns. The question isn't whether he can still play basketball at an elite level, it's whether he can overcome the mental barriers that have held him back. The conclusion, the power of second acts. These comeback stories prove that rock bottom isn't the end of your story. It's just the foundation for your next chapter, and sometimes that next chapter is better than anything you wrote before. What these players learned is that true comebacks aren't about returning to who you were, they're about becoming who you were meant to be all along. The common thread through all these stories is that each player had to lose their ego before they could find their purpose. Kobe had to stop being just a scorer and become a complete player and leader. Rose had to stop trying to be MVP and learn to be valuable. AI had to wait for the world to understand his influence. Dwight had to accept being a role player to become a champion. What's beautiful about these comebacks is that they show the human side of superhuman athletes. These weren't just basketball resurrections, they were personal transformations that happened to involve basketball. The growth, maturity, and self-awareness required for these comebacks is the same stuff that makes people better in all areas of life. The timeline for redemption varies wildly, which gives hope to anyone going through their own rock-bottom moment. Kobe's comeback took about 5 years. Rose's is still ongoing. AI's took until retirement. Dwight's required a complete personality change. There's no standard formula for bouncing back, which means there's always hope. Society's relationship with forgiveness evolved through these stories too. We learned that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define someone forever, and that growth is possible even for public figures who seemed irredeemable. These comebacks helped all of us understand redemption better. The business lesson is that authenticity and genuine change can restore marketability and public trust. These players didn't just become good at basketball again, they became compelling human interest stories that companies and fans wanted to support. Real change is recognizable and valuable. Mental health awareness played a huge role in how these comebacks were perceived and achieved. The understanding that athletes are human beings with complex emotions and psychological challenges made their struggles more relatable and their recoveries more inspiring. The lesson for current and future NBA players is that your career doesn't end when you hit rock bottom. It just enters a new phase that could be more meaningful than anything that came before. These stories prove that resilience, self-awareness, and genuine change can overcome almost any obstacle, but the lesson for all of us is even bigger. These comebacks show that it's never too late to change your story, that growth is possible at any stage of life, and that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. Rock bottom isn't a destination, it's a launching pad for something better. Which comeback story inspired you the most? Do you think there are any current players who need their own comeback story? And remember, if these millionaire athletes can overcome their obstacles and find redemption, maybe the rest of us can too.